two senior divers teamed up to explore an underwater cave. However, after they went down, they never came back up. When people found them again, they were already two lifeless bodies resting on the bottom. Eerily, both were found tightly entangled in ropes. Yet the cause of the tragedy stemmed from an inconspicuous detail. This is the Piccaninnie Ponds diving tragedy that we are telling today. On the coastline of southeastern South Australia, there is a nature reserve called Piccaninnie Ponds Conservation Park, and the open water in the northeast corner of the park is where this accident occurred. The official name is Piccaninnie Ponds. Diving enthusiasts usually refer to it as Pic Ponds. It is only 75 kilometers away from the shaft we discussed before. Therefore, Pic Ponds, which also belongs to the karst topography, naturally has a structure that is not simple, if viewed only from above. It seems like an unremarkable swampland, but this is actually the view during the wet season when the water level is high. If you switch to the dry season, it becomes much more intuitive. The surface can generally be divided into three parts. The oval-shaped first pond on the east side, about 30 meters in diameter, a 5-meter wide, 30-meter long channel extending to the west, and a small pond called Turtle Pond connected to the south. Now, switching to a side view, you will see the hidden secret of Pic Ponds. The first pond on the east is actually a 10-meter deep bowl-shaped structure, and after crossing the 2-meter deep reed curtain in the middle, you arrive at the core and most complex area, the chasm. Constantly surging groundwater continues to erode the limestone, forming a bottomless blue abyss. At 10 meters underwater, it connects to a chamber called the cathedral. It is about 35 meters deep and 20 meters wide. The walls are made of pure white limestone with almost no silt. The water is as clear as tap water. After divers swim out of another opening at 25 meters in the cathedral, they return to the chasm. As the depth increases, the left wall gradually leans to the right, from 40 meters down to the bottom at about 60 meters. Because the channel winds in a shape like a dog's leg, it is named Dog Leg Cave. Along the way, you encounter a protruding rock called the Saddle, making this area extremely narrow. Then the passage continues to curve to the right, and connects left again to a massive space called the Secret Chamber. The depth here reaches 110 meters. As for Turtle Pond to the south, it is shallow and silted, so divers rarely visit. Because of its unique structure and abundant underwater flora and fauna, the crystal clear water makes divers feel like they are flying freely in the sky. Since its discovery in 1962, enthusiasts have flocked here. Although people had almost no professional experience in cave diving then, no major accidents occurred throughout the 1960s, until 4:30 p.m. on January 29, 1972. 20-year-old Lyle and his friend Philip came to Pic Ponds. Lyle was a senior diver with about 12 years of experience, but he had very little experience in cave diving. Overconfident, the two dove in carrying tanks with only 1/3 of the gas left, and without setting any guidelines at all. Everything went smoothly at first. They swam from the first pond through the reed curtain to the chasm. After diving to about 30 meters, the two briefly explored the cathedral to the west, then prepared to return to the surface. But before surfacing, taking advantage of the remaining gas, the two decided to explore a narrow cave at the bottom of Turtle Pond. As mentioned earlier, Turtle Pond is covered in vast amounts of silt, and the narrow cave at its bottom is only about 1 meter wide. Just as the two entered the bottom passage, Lyle realized the gas was running low. But faced with this warning, he did not give up. Instead, he activated the reserve air source to continue exploring. But the problem is, in such a narrow environment, even the bubbles from exhaled air hitting the silt on the walls can affect visibility. Not to mention they had no experience with the frog kick to reduce movement. The originally clear water quickly became turbid as the silt was kicked up. In this situation, Lyle, who was behind, held onto Philip's left foot tightly. As the water became murkier, they realized this wasn't a good idea. But when they turned to retreat, they found the entrance they came through was already swallowed by silt. Helpless, they could only grope slowly in absolute darkness, relying on feeling. And it was during this process that the accident happened. Lyle, who was holding Philip's ankle tightly, suddenly let go. In the pitch-black panic of the moment, Philip didn't notice anything was wrong. After searching for a few more minutes, Philip finally saw light and swam out of Turtle Pond, only to find that Lyle hadn't followed him out. A shocked Philip returned to the cave again, but by then, the water was completely turbid. After a fruitless search, he had to return to the shore to call for help. Hours later, a diver named Herman searched underwater, and soon found Lyle's body a few meters inside the tunnel. He was head down in the silt, with his feet pressed against the cave ceiling. The gas in the tank was completely exhausted, insufficient air, no safety rope, and underestimating the danger of stirring up silt in a cave. These were all critical reasons for this tragedy. This accident indirectly led to the founding of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, CDAA, but it still didn't stop accidents from happening. Just 2 years later, on December 22nd, 27-year-old Brian and his dive buddy Claudio arrived here. planning a deep dive in the chasm, intending to reach about 60 meters before returning. Brian had about 2 years of diving experience, and this was the deepest dive he had ever attempted. Claudio had some experience, but not much either. It's worth mentioning that Brian's equipment was very rudimentary. He carried a non-diving plastic flashlight, and a reel wound with green shark fishing line. To save time, the two set up a buoy and guideline on the surface above the chasm beforehand. At 8:30 a.m. on December 23, Brian and Claudio geared up, swam to the buoy, and began their descent along the guideline. Upon reaching 9 meters, the two stopped to hang a spare cylinder each on the guideline, to facilitate the decompression procedure upon return. Because of the high pressure at depth and fast energy consumption, to save energy at the bottom, Brian unbuckled his weight belt and hung it on the guideline as well. Claudio did not do this, because he was wearing a BCD, buoyancy control device, and could precisely control buoyancy at any depth by inflating or venting. They then continued descending along the guideline. As the depth increased, the two successfully entered Dog Leg Cave. After swimming past the saddle, they reached their destination, the bottom of Dog Leg Cave at about 60 meters. The two only stayed there for about 30 seconds, before Brian tapped Claudio's shoulder, signaling to ascend. Since Claudio's air was already low by then, as they began their ascent, Claudio switched to his reserve air supply, because Brian's inflatable vest couldn't regulate buoyancy, to prevent his companion from floating out of control. Claudio specifically held Brian's left wrist with his right hand during the ascent. However, upon reaching a depth of 45 meters, nearly exhausted air made breathing difficult for Claudio. Thinking he would reach the decompression point soon, Claudio didn't panic too much, but the very next second, Claudio felt his right hand get heavy. Looking back, he saw Brian had suddenly stopped ascending. No matter how hard Claudio tried to pull his companion up, Brian remained motionless. They then realized Brian's leg might be entangled in the guideline, but the air supply was almost gone, and in the narrow space of the dog leg, Claudio couldn't help his companion. Helpless, before his gas ran out, he had to swim toward the decompression point alone. He successfully switched to the spare cylinder and decompressed for 25 minutes. During this time, he could already imagine his friend's end. Upon surfacing, he immediately called for rescue. The next day, police found Brian's body at 57 meters. His mask had fallen off, and his arms were spread out as if calling for help. His lower body was tightly wrapped in green line, and his diving knife remained in its sheath. Surprisingly, there was still about 700 psi of air in his tank. After an autopsy, the local doctor believed Brian died of severe decompression sickness. But this conclusion seemed very unreasonable. Furthermore, some believe that while ascending in the narrow Dog Leg Cave, Claudio might have accidentally kicked Brian's face, causing his mask to fall off. Regardless, given that neither diver thought to use a knife to cut the entangled line, it's highly likely both were under the influence of severe nitrogen narcosis. But the tragedies of Piccaninnie Ponds didn't stop there. April 7, 1984. 28-year-old John and 31-year-old Barry came to Piccaninnie Ponds, and they weren't exactly novices. John had earned his CDAA Category 2 cave diving qualification about 8 months before the accident. Barry only held a basic scuba certification. Although he had no cave diving credentials, he often went cave diving with John. The report also mentioned that the night before, John told his wife he planned to do a quick dive the next morning, because he had an appointment to handle at 10 a.m. So, early that day, the two dove in using single cylinders. Around 9 a.m., two other divers, Gordon and Roger, arrived at Piccaninnie Ponds for a buddy dive. They noticed another car parked on the shore, so they went to the entry point, looking for bubbles on the surface, but saw nothing. They then geared up, and entered the water around 10:15 a.m. They dove down to the start of the dogleg at about 36 meters, and were surprised to find a spare cylinder fixed to the wall. Next to it was a 3mm white guideline, and this guideline was stretched very tight, and no bubbles were rising from below. Gordon and Roger suddenly had an ominous feeling. They carefully dove to about 45 meters, noticing what looked like a dim beam from a flashlight, in the darkness about 15 meters below. This situation fully confirmed their suspicions. After completing their decompression and returning to the surface, they immediately called the police. After police went down and confirmed, the two were the missing divers, John and Barry. Their bodies were tightly entangled in ropes, and one diver was still holding a coiled loop of rope in his hand, showing he was still trying to solve the problem in his final moments. Instruments showed their maximum depth was 68 meters. The pressure at this depth is about 7.8 atmospheres. In those days, diving to this depth on ordinary compressed air carried a severe risk of nitrogen narcosis. As mentioned before, the two chose to dive quickly, because John had to make a 10 a.m. appointment, and this rushed mentality is a taboo in diving. It makes divers more prone to panic when encountering problems. accelerating oxygen consumption. So when the two realized they were entangled in the rope, the little gas remaining was not enough to support them in untying the complex knots, ultimately giving their lives to Piccaninnie Ponds.